Ghost in the New York City by a Shark's Reading Glasses on AO3. Chapter 11. Open Your Wings, Evil Angel. Danny twisted and turned, trying to unfold himself in the confined space he was trapped in. He didn't remember how he got in here. He didn't know where here was, but he felt unsettling familiar. He felt like he'd been stuffed into the world's smallest locker. Only there wasn't any wielded bolts or metal parts sticking to his skin, and it was eerily silent when he shifted. He opened up his eyes, and all he could see was darkness, barely making out the mechanical workings of some type of machine. He tried to turn around, but found his body was contorted impossibly, and realized he was in his ghost form. Danny sighed and banged his head against the wall, understanding why being so cramped felt this familiar. Had Jazz accidentally captured him in the Fenton thermos again? Oh, Jazz! Danny yelled out, furiously, trying to shift a little more comfortable position. You can let me out now! Ha ha ha! Danny got stuck in the phantom thermos. How hilarious! He simmered in the tight space, trying to sweat when he wasn't let out or didn't receive an immediately reply. Jazz? Tucker? Sam? Danny asked, uneasily as his core started to thrum. Is anyone there? He started to breathe heavily as he was left in the dark silence, feeling slightly claustrophobic, while he turned frantically in the confined space. He pulled his arms up by his chest and tried to push the walls outwards with his hands, giving himself the illusion of more space. Jazz! Danny shouted desperately, this time trying to push against the walls with his legs and feet. Sam? Tucker? Anyone! Please let me out! A shudder of dread and unease went down Danny's spine as he continued to struggle in the thermos. How the hell did he end up in here? Jess had gotten better at ghost hunting months ago, and she managed their equipment a lot better than anyone else in the team besides Sam. He could remember the last time Jazz had needed practice with ghost hunting. He couldn't even remember what he was doing before waking up here. Wait, what was he doing before he woke up here? Danny stilled, a distinct feeling of disconnect and forebodying flooding his core as he tried to remember. New York, Danny thought as he tried to calm down. I was in New York with Peter and Wade and Fido in their apartment. I ran away. I ran away from home because of my parents. Danny felt his core bloom with ectoplasm, uncontrollably as his memories came back to him. Had his parents decided he was an echo? Like they had always insisted in their ghost research? Were they determined to capture him and find out? Or had the GIW finally gotten wind of Danny's identity and seized him for themselves? How did they know where he was? What about Peter? What did they do to Peter, Wade, and Fido? How long had he been in here? What if he ran out of energy and accidentally changed forms while he was still in the thermos? While terrified thoughts continued to fill his head, Danny felt his ghost form change as ectoplasm continued to bleed out from his core, running rampage as a surge of protectiveness mixed with panic. I have to get out of here, Danny thought wildly, as he hastily stiffed and shoved himself against the thermos slightly, relieved that Sam and Tucker had already helped him out how to free himself. After getting stuck in the thermos so many times, Sam and Tucker had trained with him so he could get out by himself, concerned he might be caught that way by his parents. He ended up destroying the thermos they had used, the device going off like a bomb when he had overloaded it with mini ectofibers with his ghostly wail. Sam and Tucker has been ecstatic that he wouldn't ever be trapped in one again. But Danny had promised himself that he would only ever use that tactic as the last resort because of how dangerous the damage could be. It certainly felt like a last resort now. Danny exhaled shakily as he curled in on himself as tightly as he could. feeling like the walls were curling around him as he brought it to his knees, to his chest, and covered his ears with his hands. He formed ecto-shields over his ears and nearly passed out from the claustrophobic sensation while he prepared for the wail. Normally, his ghostly wail didn't affect him, but that was when he was in open, wide spaces. Letting out his wail while he was in the thermostat, without some protection, would be like sitting in front of a giant speaker in an ecto chamber with your volume turned all the way up. He was liable to outburst his own ears if he wasn't careful, but it was the only attack that he would be able to overload the ectofiber on the thermos. He attempted to take a deep breath to start his wail, but his breath hitched when its nails stuck into his skin behind his ears to ground himself before he tried to scream again. The wail echoed over the vibrating vibrant in the thermostat, making the walls bulge and crack as the ectofiber was quickly overloaded before the thermos burst open like an overpressurized bottle of soda. The force of the explosion threw Danny against the wall, and he was so confused and shaken by the blast that he didn't have time to turn intangible. He slammed against the wall, his breath knocked out of him, so hard that he started coughing and wheeling. When he landed on the floor, Danny dropped the ecto shield from around his ears and clutched his chest as he tried to regain his breath, dropping himself against the wall on one of his arms as he heaved. Once his breathing was under control, he opened his eyes and started to observe his surroundings. He wasn't in Princeton, overbearingly white and sterile lab he pictured himself ending up in if he was ever caught by the GIW. Instead, the room was dissipated and dusty, piles of rotten wood, crushed bits of cracked red brick, and concrete dust gathering around the place. A broken light fixture was hanging by a single thin wire in the ceiling and was swaying unsteadily from the blast, while light seeped in from a dirty and cracked window. A few pieces of rat and moth bitten furniture laid abandoned on their side, and strips of moldy wallpaper peeled itself off the wall, while trash and paper of newspaper littered the floor. A staircase sagged in on itself along the wall, some of the steps completely broken through, and a handrail overgrown with shivered vines that stretched from the ceiling. Danny peeked through a hole in the ceiling, showing the upper floor was abandoned as the downstairs, as cracked and chunks of missing plaster revealed rust-eaten pipes. Danny gingerly pushed himself off the floor, using the wall he was thrown against, making sure he didn't bring the whole thing down to his head, and tried to figure out where the hell he was. He took a cautious step forward as he stretched out the Aegis in his back, his foot brushing against small bits of rubble. The room was. It didn't look familiar to him, and the air smelled stale and old. Maybe this was his parents or the GIW had captured him. They had hid the thermos in an abandoned building and were planning to come back for him later. But when Danny looked at what was left of the containment device he had held in his hand, he noticed something strange. Danny leaned down to sag one of the larger pieces. The metal warped drastically from the blast. One side of the metal was covered in dingy circuits and thin cord wires and made the inner workings of the thermos. The other was a metal piece of dull and tarnished, full of dings and scratches. It almost looked 50 years old, but that was impossible. He was just at Peter's apartment a few hours ago, maybe 10 at most. Even if they had captured him, there was no way his parents or the GIW would leave him in some random building for that long. But then why did everything look so abandoned and decrepit? Feeling more uneasy, Danny took another step forward, planning to phase through the wall and go outside when something like glass cracked under his foot. He looked down, deliberately lifting his foot to see what was underneath. What he saw had his core skyrocketing into overdrive. It was a medium glass and wooden picture frame practically covered in brick and concrete dust. The wood was rotten and termite bitten, and the glass was cracked and yellow with age. The picture was faded out and dotted with watermarks, but he could still make out the orange of Jazz's hair and Dad's jumpsuit, the red tint of Mom's goggles, and his own shoes. Danny fell to his knees as he relentlessly pushed the broken glass off the picture and anxiously lifted the photo out of the frame, afraid that the picture would disintegrate in his hands. With new foreboding, Danny slowly dragged his eyes away from the photo and looked around the room again. This was his living room. That was the sofa his parents had bought when they moved in, and that was the light fixture Dad had to replace when he accidentally blasted the old one with an ectogun misfire. That was the hole Danny had to fix when he tripped over the rug and had put a fist through the wall, and the stain from his mother had spilled raw ectoplasm on the floor. This was his home, in Amity. What the hell happened? No, Danny whispered, feeling overwhelmed and terrified. No, no, no! Danny shoved himself off the floor, clutching the picture to his chest and bleeding from the house, facing through the boarded-up door and nearly tripping down the steps. His neighborhood looked as deserted and neglected as his house did. All the buildings in the block either boarded up or pipes of crumbling brick. There were chunks of aspen missing from the streets, and the sidewalk were littered with fallen electrical lines and caved-in walls. The sky was overcast in a smoggy brown, and Danny heard nothing but the sounds of his own panic breathing. No voices or footsteps of people, not even a bird. Danny turned wildly in the streets before booking it down the clearest path, feeling too unstable to fly. "Hello?" Danny shouted desperately, still clinging to his family picture. "Please, anyone! I need help! Please!" Danny choked as he tripped over a hidden pipe, skipping on his hands and knees and nearly falling face first into some shards of broken mirror. He patted hysterically on the ground before he got his face out of the dirt, practically trying to pin down the picture before it picked up by a breeze. As his hand pinned the photo to the rubble, he caught his reflection at the corner of his eyes in one of the mirror shards. It wasn't him that stared back. Instead of his normal thin frame, his chest and shoulders were broad, his arms were huge, his eyes were sunken in and glowing blood red instead of toxic green with dark skin around his eyes, and he could see his ears formed into points. Instead of his normal short white hair, his hair was long and drenched like small fire, and his chin was goated. His skin was sickly turquoise color, and he could see the sharp, long fangs peeking out from behind his lips. But the most dramatic change was his expression. His eyes were aligned with cruel and wrathful remorse, and his mouth was twisted into a conceited, mischievous sneer. "Didn't I tell you, Danny?" Dan's voice spoke in his ear, as Danny reflected and mouthed the words. "You'd always turn into me." Peter's spidey senses jolted him awake as it scraped down his back before Danny screamed from the living room, and he scrambled out of his bed towards the bedroom door, swinging his web shooter off his desk as he passed. Wade, who had invited himself over to sleep now that Danny was determined to take the couch, instinctively reached under the bed frame for one of his held handguns, and he stashed there before throwing off the blankets and followed Peter, switching the safety off and finger on the trigger as he passed the foot of the bed. Fido, who had been resting between them, jerked into the air with a drawed-out hiss, the normal white good-line green eyes shrunken into slits and ectoplasm along the back, arching to shape visceral spikes, like a cat's fur standing on its end. They all ran down the hall into the living room, lights from New York life streaming in from the open curtains on the balcony window. Peter skidded around to the side of the couch and watched Danny struggle with his blankets he had borrowed for the night. The blankets were tangled tightly around Danny's legs and waist. Danny was frantically kicking and twisting on the sofa, small sorrowed moans trailing out of his mouth. "Danny," Peter whispered desperately, as Wade and Phil trayed behind him. Peter was about to gently pat down Danny's leg when Danny flinched awake at the sound of his voice. Peter snatched his hands back as Danny rolled off the couch, hitting the floor and twisting himself further into the blankets as he tried to push himself away from Peter's and Wade's looming forms. Peter kneeled down to help Danny out of the blankets, but Danny turned his legs intangible and faced through the mess of blankets before scrambling back. He shifted into the corner between the bookshelf and the wall where there was a spider plant hung in the ceiling, a trail of frost covering the floor in his wake. Danny whimpered softly as he gulped for breath, his shoulders and chest heaving as he hyperventilated. "Danny?" Peter tried to speak calmly and softly as he crawled after Danny, sitting down in front of him a few feet away so he wouldn't feel crowded. "Danny, you're having a panic attack. Can you try and take a few deep breaths for me?" As Peter talked to Danny, Wade flickered the safety on his gun and slid to the coffee table before going over and standing by Peter, Fido clenching at his shoulders and trailing in distress. Danny brought his knees to his chest, his arms shaking as he hugged them around his legs and leaned his forehead against his knees. "Can't," Danny cried through his gasp. "Can't breathe." Fido cried out distraughtly and made an attempt to fly towards Danny, but Wade plucked them gently out of the air and muffled a few words. "There's air here, Danny. You can breathe. You're hyperventilating," Peter explained. "Can you try and slow down? Can I hold your hand, or do you need something else to help?" Danny vehemently shook his head, his body swamping with the movement as he continued to pant. "That's fine, Danny," Peter replied, biting his lip. "Can you try to breathe with me? We'll start easy, okay? In 4 seconds, out 4 seconds." Danny nodded, shakily, and Peter took an exaggerated slow breath, inhaling for the dotted amount of time before exhaling steadily. Danny tried to copy, but his breath hitched 3 times on the inhale and his exhale shuddered. They tried again for a few more cycles, but Danny's breathing only slowed marginally, and Peter could see tears trailing down Danny's cheeks. "Home slice?" Wade piped up softly, after Danny continued to struggle with the 4th cycle of breathing, Fido still gripped in his arms. "You're in Peter's apartment in Queens. It's 12:30 in the morning, and it's only you, me, Peter, and Fido in the apartment. Can you repeat that back to me?" I I'm in Peter's apartment in Queens. It's 12:30 in the morning. Only you, me, Peter, and Fido in apartment." Danny recloated, exhaling in a rush and stuttering while his breath hitched. He was still breathing fast, but it was a lot better than when they started. "That's good, Danny," Peter encouraged. "Say it again." Danny repeated the lines, his breath starting to slow, and Peter got an idea. "Danny, we're gonna try something different now. Is that okay?" Danny nodded into his knees. "Can you tell me 5 things you see?" Danny steered himself and peeked over his knees as he drew in a steady breath. "You? Wade? Fido? Sofa? Bookcase." Danny listed, his breath still shaky but much slower. "Awesome," Peter reassured him, giving Danny a supportive smile. "Next one. 4 things you could hear." Danny was silent for a moment as he concentrated on listening. Car horns? The heater? My core? Your breathing." Danny started, his own breathing going down another notch. "That's good, Danny." Peter cheered smoothly. Now, 3 things you could touch. Danny deliberately lifted one of his arms to hold the brick wall. Wall, floorboards, my PJs, Danny declared, Peter continuing to smile at him, and Fido chirped hopefully from Wade's arms. You're doing great, Danny, Peter praised. You're almost done. 2 things you could smell. Danny quirked his brows and wiggled his nose. Sweat, dust, Danny continued, his breathing almost back to normal. Nearly there, Peter responded. Last one. 1 thing you could taste. Danny took a deep breath and let it out slowly, lifting his face out of his knees and leaning against the wall. Last night's pista, Danny answered, shifting slightly in his corner. Gross. There you go, Danny said, and the atmosphere in the room lifted as everyone exhaled faintly in relief. Danny let go of his legs and scuffled fiercely at the tear tracks on his face. Jesus Christ, Danny whispered hotly, and Peter flinched. It's okay, Danny. Peter tried to reassure him. Motherfucker, Danny spat, stretching out his legs, and Wade winced in empathy. We've all been there, Homeslice. It's fine, Wade retorted, and Danny sighed in frustration. Are you all right? Peter asked, shifting closer to see if Danny had any bruises forming on his face. You didn't hurt yourself when you fell off the couch, did you? That's my pride, Danny remarked, sulkingly, and Wade huffed a sad laugh, while Peter bit the inside of his cheek. Can I squeeze in there with you? Peter requested, and Danny shifted more to the side to give room for him. Peter scooted in between Danny and the bookshelf, only wrapping his arms around Danny after he leaned on Peter's shoulder. When Peter's arm touched Danny's skin, he had to bite back a gasp. Danny was freezing. Do you want a blanket back? Peter questioned. Danny shook his head against Peter's shoulder, even as he started to shiver, and made a motion with his hands. Fido wiggled themselves out of Wade's grasp and burrowed into Danny's chest with a high-pitched squeal. As Danny rubbed Fido's face between his hands, Wade followed their example and sat down on the floor on their feet, half leaning on the glass door leading to the balcony. They were all quiet for a few minutes as they collected their thoughts before Wade spoke. I'm gonna go on a limb here, Wade said as he scratched the back of his head, and guess that you don't want to talk about it. Danny flinched, bringing Fido under his chin as the shade whimpered in concern. Not really, no, Danny retorted, keeping his attention on Fido as he continued to shiver. Wade nodded sympathetically. Valid. Wade accepted, and Peter squeezed Danny in a one-armed hug. We'll never make you talk about anything you don't want to, Danny, Peter promised, nuzzling his head against Danny's. But we'll always be ready to listen. Danny nodded his head, still snuggling with Fido. Peter took a deep breath and sighed, giving Danny another one-armed hug. You probably don't want to go back to sleep, huh? Peter gasped, and Danny ultimately shook his head. What do you usually do when you can't sleep? Wade inquired. Movies? Video games? Midnight snack? 'Cause I could totally hook you up with the best tacos in New York, if you want. Peter let out a stifled snicker. Usually go flying by myself for a couple of hours, Danny replied tensely, sneaking a look towards Peter. Peter bit his lip and thought. He knew how cathartic it would be to use his powers just for the sake of using them, but how freeing it was to fly, or swing in his case, over the city. 3 hours max, Peter decided, and Danny straightened up in astonishment. And you'll have to keep your phone with you. You can text me if you get lost or if you run into any problems. You're really gonna let me go out alone? Danny murmured, disbelievingly. Fido chirped curiously. If it'll help you feel better, yeah, Peter acknowledged, shrugging his shoulders. Believe us, Danny. We get it. Just be careful, okay? Don't go looking for trouble. Danny wrapped his arms around Peter in a full hug. I won't, I promise. Danny agreed and gave Fiddle one last nuzzle before he handed them back to Wade with a hug and grabbed his phone off the couch. As soon as he had his phone, Danny changed forms, giving them a tiny nod of appreciation before phasing through the balcony door and flying into the sky. As soon as Danny was in the air, he picked up in a direction and just flew. He barely paid attention to any of his surroundings, simply trying to enjoy flying around New York at night as he walked through his thoughts and feelings, no longer feeling a chill now that he was a ghost form. A part of him hated that he couldn't be up front with Peter and Wade about his emotions, and was already second-guessing and trying to anticipate how they would react. Another part of him, the part that felt betrayed after his parents had shot him, was paranoid that this was going to be the one thing that pushed Peter and Wade over the edge, where they would draw the line. And Danny knew that he was being ridiculous. He could remember every single time Peter and Wade were patient with him, or let him justify his actions, or actually listened to him when he talked. But the part of him that felt abandoned by his parents was afraid that this would be the one thing Peter and Wade couldn't understand, even though he knew they would at least try. Those thoughts circled around in his head for nearly an hour until he broke through a wall of skyscrapers, the building turning scout and transitioning from glass and steel to red brick and wood. The area looked sort of similar, but it wasn't a place that he had visited as a ghost before, so he didn't really know exactly where he was. He circled around for a bit until he found a rooftop that seemed like it didn't get a lot of foot traffic, and went in for a soft landing. Once his feet had touched the roof, he walked over to what looked like a hood vent that went into the building. Danny leaned against the vent, fishing his phone out of his pockets and checking the time, and found he'd been flying for more than an hour already. He sighed dejectedly and let his head thump against the vent, figuring he could hang out here and mope for a while before starting to make his way back to Peter's apartment. Just as he was about to push himself off the vent and walk towards the edge of the rooftop to people watch, a deep voice spoke from somewhere behind the vent. Phantom? A male voice asked, curiously, and Danny jumped into the air, energy building up in his palms for an ecto-beam. Damn it. Danny was really starting to miss when enemies couldn't sneak up on him because they were ghosts. He hastily scanned the rooftop again, but instantly powered down his ecto-beam when he saw Daredevil's back signature get-up on the other side of the roof. Holy shit, Danny murmured in awe, trying to swallow up his nerves. You know who I am? Spider-Man mentioned you might be in the city for a while a few days ago. Daredevil responded, rolling up the vent as he took a few steps towards him, the tails of his black mask swinging as he walked. He asked if I could spread the word around to the other vigilantes so we didn't accidentally hurt you by mistake. Danny blinked, and his core hummed pleasantly. Spider-Man did that for me? Danny asked, touched. Yeah, Daredevil confirmed. He said you're holding up with him while you're handling something. Speaking of which, aren't you a little far from Queens? Danny gulped. After the whole Tony Stark debacle, Danny had wondered if Peter knew any of the other New York heroes or vigilantes. Peter had smiled slyly and mentioned he knew a few before telling some of his favorite encounters. From the way Peter had talked about him, Daredevil was a serious and hard-hitting one, as some of the news sources said he was. But Danny didn't hold that against him. Some of the things Daredevil tackled, like human trafficking rings, rapists, vicious muggers, and various mobs, needed someone who could work around the legal system when it failed to keep people like that behind bars. But the only thing Danny keenly remembered Peter pointing out was that Daredevil tended to stick exclusively to Hell's Kitchen, and he didn't like visitors. Sorry, Danny apologized quickly, landing back on the roof and wincing his hands together. I was just trying to clear my head. I didn't mean to go out this far. Daredevil tilted his head at the moment before he nodded in acceptance.
Try sticking closer to Queens next time,
Daredevil remarked. Yeah, sure. Danny complied, taking half a step back and throwing his thumbs over his shoulders. I can leave if you want. Go haunt someplace else for a while? How'd you know I was up here anyways? Daredevil let out a bark of laughter before moving past Danny and going to the roof's edge.
You're easy to spot if you know where to look.
Daredevil grinned, like he was secretly laughing at an inside joke, before he crossed his arms and tilted his head again, like he was listening for something.
And you're fine. Just try to keep it down.
Danny nodded, before tensely joining Daredevil at the roof's edge, leaning his arms against the safety railing and watching people on the sidewalk, his thoughts circling back to his nightmares and his reluctance to tell Peter and Wade. A few minutes went by, and Danny slipped his eyes over to Daredevil before turning back to the sidewalk and biting his lips. One of the reasons it was so hard to talk to Peter sometimes was because he was also Spider-Man. And Spider-Man was such a good hero. He stopped muggings, robberies, and rescued people from burning buildings. But he also took a time to help people with their groceries, or give directions to someone who was lost, or got cats out of trees. And Danny was trying to stop ghosts from hurting his friends and family when he barely understood anything about his powers. With that kind of reputation, Peter, unknowingly, put pressure on Danny to live up to his expectations. While Peter always tried to assure him that it was understandable if he lost control of his powers in high-stress situations, Danny still hated that it happened at all, and he couldn't explain to Peter why he was upset about it unless he broke the expectations Peter had of him. But maybe a vigilante like Daredevil would understand.
Got something to say?
Daredevil asked, and Danny attempted to swallow past the lump in his throat. How do you do it? Danny murmured, keeping his attention solely on the pedestrians below. Daredevil tensed.
Do what?
He demanded sternly. Danny threw his hands over in front of him, motioning to the city, and made a noise of frustration. How do you stop yourself from going too far? Danny imploded. The kind of thugs you deal with, they're disgusting and horrible, and I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't mind if you put them 6 feet under, but you don't. You send them to the hospital with broken bones and mounts of recovery in a jail cell, so how do you do it? Danny paused, taking a shaky breath and letting it out slowly before taking the plunge. Have you ever thought of killing them before? Daredevil jerked in shock, but never took his attention away from whatever he was trying to listen for.
Once.
Daredevil answered softly, turning around to lean on the edge. And Danny stood up straight, turning his body towards Daredevil.
Ever heard of, Wilson Fricks?
Yeah, Danny replied. There was a story on the news a couple of years ago. I remember it being a big deal. Daredevil nodded.
I was one of the people who helped put him away first.
Daredevil continued.
But while he was in prison, and then during his house arrest, he found out the identities of some of my friends and threatened them, over and over. One of them ended up being killed by someone impersonating me.
Daredevil curled his hands onto fists on his arms before he relaxed them.
And I wanted to kill Frist for what he did. I had him. I could have ended him.
What made you stop? Danny asked, fretfully.
Daredevil shrugged. Before he surrendered, I nearly beat Fritz to death, he explained. But if I had crossed that line, then I would have been letting Fritz transform who I am. I'm the captain of my soul. I'm the master of my fate. I wasn't going to let Fritz beat me by challenging my philosophies or ideals. So I let him alive, even though I know there's still a chance he might hurt my friends.
There was a pause before Daredevil spoke again.
Why are you asking, Phantom?
Danny hunched on his shoulders and got at his lip before
sitting down on the roof and leaning his back against the edge. Because I think I might have wanted to kill someone, Danny replied, shakily, bringing his hands up to hold his head. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. I've never wanted to hurt anyone like that. Not even other ghosts, but this guy. His name is Platimus, and he's a hybrid, like me, but doesn't use his powers like I do. He's hurt my friends and my family before, repeatedly. And every time he does, I start to lose control of my powers. Of myself. The last time it happened, he nearly killed someone and I blacked out. If Spider-Man hadn't been there, I think I would have... I think I would have killed him. And it keeps happening. I don't want to be a monster. I want it to stop, but I don't know how. Have you talked to Spider-Man about this? Daredevil questioned, and it was almost gentle. Danny shook his head. No, Danny moaned brokenly. I'm so scared about how he'll react. I can't deal with that. What if he... Danny exhaled shakily and tried to calm himself back down. Daredevil let him get a hang of himself before he decided to comment. I think you should try telling him as soon as you feel ready, Daredevil suggested with a sigh. And I know that doesn't help. But Phantom, Spider-Man will find out eventually. And it will be better if it comes from you. My friends didn't really know about this. And here, Daredevil motions to himself. For a long time. And when they found out, it wasn't good. It almost ruined my whole relationship with them. I know, Danny interrogated, dragging his hands down his face. But what if I never feel ready? Sometimes it's gonna feel like that no matter what, Daredevil agreed. But that's when all you could do is hope for the best. And Spider-Man is known for that. Try putting your trust in him, okay? Danny sucked in a breath and nodded. Okay, he echoed. Danny managed to make it back to Peter's apartment with 30 minutes to spare before his 3 hours were up. He landed on the balcony before slipping intangible through the glass window. After he had sneaked inside, he saw a hint of Wade standing by the stove in the kitchen with a dark hoodie over his sweatwear and a spatula in his hands. Danny made himself tangible before changing forms, a slight chill seeping into his skin before he walked towards the kitchen. He was about to call over to Wade when Peter trailed from behind the wall. Danny, you're back! Peter exclaimed as he rushed forward, Fido hanging from his shoulders and trailing happily. Danny nodded, stiffly, as Peter guided him into the kitchen, and then blinked at the absolute obscene amount of pancakes stacked on a plate by the stove while Fido flew over and nuzzled into his neck with a tiny coo. Why are you making so many pancakes? Danny inquired, as he sat down at the table in the chair closest to the wall, while Peter took the one closest to Wade. They're my specialty. Patted, pick-me-up pancakes. Wade sing-song as he grabbed a large bowl of batter from the other side of the stove and poured a motion into a frying pan, smugged some of the mixture into his hoodie. They're guaranteed to... Wade was hungry, but I didn't feel like cooking. Peter interrupted, pointing a finger over his shoulders and rolling his eyes. And that's the only thing Wade knows how to make. Pancakes. So... Wade whirled around to face them, pointing the spatula dramatically at Peter. Betrayal, Wade gasped, holding his other hand over his chest. Pea-pie, I told you in the most confidence. How could you? Peter turned in his chair and looked at Wade with a deadpan stare before slowly reaching into his loose sweatpants pocket, pulling out a small ball of webbing and fiddling it between his fingers. Gee, Peter said impressively. I wonder why I do such a thing. Wade turned pink and muttered under his breath as he went back to making pancakes while Fido turned with laughter from Danny's neck. And Danny hid his own snicker behind his hand. Peter swiveled his head back in Danny's direction and smirked at him before it became gentle. Are you feeling better? Peter asked, and Danny shrugged, his smile dimming. A little bit. Danny admitted, and Fido was warblily unhappy. Peter frowned, stuffing a ball of webbing back into his pants, before leaning over and tousling Danny's hair. "If you ever need some more time alone, just let us know, all right?" Peter encountered, sitting back in his chair. Danny nodded stiffly. Daredevil's warning clicked in his head. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you guys." Danny stuttered, and Wade stilled before turning around and his back with the stove while Peter perked up in his seat. Danny braced himself and opened his mouth. His mother's face twisting into an angry snarl as she reached for her ecto-gun. "I've got your back, Danny." His father looking at him in shock and uneased disbelief, rising out of his chair. "But that's when all you could do is hope for the best, and Spider-Man is known for that. Try putting your trust in him, okay?" A whine of ectoblasts and then a stinging burn in his chest. "To me and Peter, and your friends and your sister, you will always just be Danny." The pain making him hazy, and his core urging him to run, his mother enraged cries following behind him. Before he clenched his hands in the fabric of his pants. I have something that I need to tell you." Danny started lowering his head and hiding his eyes behind his bangs. "But I'm not ready yet. And it's not because I don't trust you," Danny added hastily. "There's just something I have to figure out first. So, yeah. Just wanted to give you guys a heads up." Danny chewed on his lip when no one else said anything for a few seconds, lifting his head when Peter got out of his chair and walked over to him, pulling out Danny's seat so he was turned towards him. Peter put his hands around Danny's shoulder and tugged him in for a tender hug. Danny went willingly, burying his head in Peter's stomach, while Peter trailed his hands through Danny's hair smoothly. "Whenever you're ready to talk to us, Danny, we'll be here," Peter whispered. "We aren't going anywhere." That is such a cute... Okay, it's been a while. Half of this episode was recorded before my huge break from this series specifically, and then the other half was recorded today. The reason why this one went on break and why it's back now is because I was having difficulty with my voice actor and scheduling. You know, they had a job. At the time, I had a job as well. They had a job, I had a job. They had school. I had other obligations and responsibilities. I had 2 jobs. So scheduling a time for us to sit and record was a bit of a hassle. We ended up just going on with like them sending me their voice recordings of them doing it instead of being in a call and doing it and whatever. Even though the quality would significantly go down, and especially in the acting part. But I was okay with that. I was fine with that. And then, well, let's just say I'm no longer friends with that person. I'm no longer in contact with that person. Stuff happened. Point taken is, I don't got a voice actor anymore, and I'm not getting one. No, not going through that again. That was a hassle and a half. Not going through that again. If I was to go through that again, I would not have it, so I need to do weekly posts. I would record it in advance and then post it. I've learned my lesson. So I am back, and this series is completely back now. I will be, having another episode tomorrow. Also, I noticed my subscribers. I hit 1,000. I'm so happy and excited. So those who are listening to this, and you are also into My Hero Academia, because the special is a My Hero Academia special for, for my subscribers, because that's mostly what I do. I did this one because this is such a wonderful fanfic that I absolutely love. It's my first ever bookmark. But, I have a surprise for you guys at 6. So, 6 EST. No, not EST, PST. Hold up, PST. Pacific Standard Time. There you go. At 6 PST and then 9 EST. So, take a look for that. It's a special that I'm very happy to be able to provide to you guys, and I'm actually gonna go ahead and record it afterwards So today you guys get 3 videos. I don't know why I keep calling them episodes. You get this one, you then get the random cloud, and then you get the special video. But thank you so much for being so patient while we continue this series, and I have finally continued the series. Here it is, and it's here to stay. I no longer have a voice actor, so I will not have issues with scheduling or anything like that, and it's just up to me sitting here. Tomorrow's episode might be a tad bit late. I will still post it, do not worry, but it might be late due to my own scheduling, stuff like that. I'm pretty sure the next chapter is a lengthy one. They're always lengthy. These are really lengthy. Like, for example, this one was about 7,000 words. Quite a lengthy boy. The next one is 10,000 words, so it's going to be roughly about an hour and 15 minutes of a video, which would take me like 2 hours to record and edit, which it's a struggle, but I have no idea if I will be able to actually sit, record, and edit and finish it off before I have to do my things that I have for the day and be able to do it by 2 p.m. But I will still upload the video tomorrow. It just might be late, so stay tuned for that. It might be late. Actually, about the fanfic, the notes on the fanfic itself, this is a really nice episode, or chapter. I keep saying episode. Oh my god, I'm going insane. But this is a really nice chapter. I like this chapter. It's one of my favorites. Because, you know, you get Daredevil and Danny having a sit-down talk and chat with each other. And Daredevil has a point, you know, you might never feel like there's a time for stuff. It's a leap of faith. Let me quote the Spider-Man series from like the big I'm quoting it. I know it's a leap of faith. I'm quoting Spider-Man, you know, Peter B. Parker. Was it B? Yeah, Peter B. Parker. I'm quoting it, but it is what it is. It is a leap of faith, right? It's what it is. You know, sometimes you'll never be ready, right? So I cannot wait for the next chapter. The next chapter is actually, I feel, yeah, the next chapter is a very interesting one. We do get Tony Stark. I will say this, I don't like Tony Stark. I hate Tony Stark. I will die on this mountain. But thank you so much for being patient while this series returns, and I finally get to return the series, and I'm so happy I get to do the series again. As I mentioned before, the big problem was the voice actor and stuff like that, and that is all situated, that is all good. I will now be able to continue this, so thank you so much for being patient. And as always, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds, have a wonderful day or night. Join our community Discord server, link is in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.